Next up, it's my great pleasure to introduce Charles Cooper. Thanks for flying all the way from the United States, Charles. The floor is yours. Thank you very much. So I think it's just a space bar. So.
Space bar?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Charles.
It's good that you should. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. I will have to say that was a fascinating presentation to hear the Olympics, the success. In the United States, we're going to be hosting the 28th Summer Olympics in Los Angeles. So I'd like to thank special appreciation to AFNSR and Emmanuel for hosting the FCC, as well in allowing the FCC staff to shadow some of the activities that are occurring so we can gain our own experiences. As 2028 is not too far along, so thank you. So I won't be talking about the Olympics, right? Be talking about how we're approaching and how we're doing in spectrum sharing in the United States and kind of a multitude of bands here. And of course, thank you for WinForum for inviting me and Sure for hosting this event. So I am the head of the Office of Spectrum Management within NTIA. NTIA has a couple of missions. Number one, we're the manager of the federal spectrum within the United States. So that means the Department of Defense, our mods, the FAA, the NOAA weather radars, the Weather Service, plus the 16 other federal agencies that use spectrum in the United States. So that's a big job unto itself. But we also have a related task of being the principal advisor to the president on spectrum and telecommunications matters, which led to the formation of the National Spectrum Strategy, which I'll be speaking on as well. So two big jobs. There's some tension between those jobs too, to be quite real, and but we try to get with it, to try to get through it as much as possible. And then of course, the FCC, as we know, they manage the non-federal spectrum uses, broadcast, cellular, et cetera. And we coordinate with the FCC pretty much on an hourly basis in the country. It's a very, very active and it's a great relationship. So talking about kind of stepping back, we heard from the Olympics and all the spectrum sharing that occurred there among the different services, the existing incumbent services and the additional services there. But looking at it from kind of a more global issue here, we're certainly seeing the spectrum become more crowded. And I think the future belongs to those who can best harness creative approaches to spectrum access in a wide variety and creative ways. So of course, by nature, this includes spectrum sharing. And if we fail to move forward on approaches and technologies now, I fear our management of spectrum will quickly become antiquated, strangling innovation in the crib and jeopardizing the technological leadership for the world. So the White House has actually been pretty involved with this, and it's from the White House on down. They've acknowledged this fact and reaffirmed our country's commitment to developing sharing strategies. As a matter of fact, it even made it to the president. President Biden last year signed out a memo on the U.S. spectrum policy, indicating many aspects, but he also called for the development of the National Spectrum Strategy to set the stage for us as we jump forward into greater spectrum sharing initiatives. We talked a little bit more about the National Spectrum Strategy in a moment, but of course we've already made a pretty big amount of progress on it, and we look forward to kind of discussing among the world about the feasibility of this. So some current examples of spectrum sharing, both the FCC and NTIA have been working together for years on the current approaches to spectrum management. Two, which I'll talk about today, are what we call the Citizens Broadband Radio Service and kind of that mid 3 gigahertz spectrum. And then also with the FCC with their 6 gigahertz band approach. So the CBRS, as I mentioned, is in that mid-band spectrum. It has 3 tiers of spectrum users. The top tier that gets priority are federal users, principally Department of Defense. They have some naval assets. So we have sensing technology along the coast that we have private companies that have installed to monitor. So when those Navy incumbents need that spectrum for their uses. It senses and very quickly turns off any CBRS users in that what we call DPA, that geographic area to turn off. It's been remarkably successful. We haven't had any reports of harmful interference to these important federal operations. So I think that that's a great win as well. Also, CBRS does have a kind of a scheduling / notification as well, primarily at test ranges located throughout the United States as well. So sensing is prominent, but we also have a scheduling technology as well. ITS, the Institute of Telecommunications Science, which is the research arm for NTIA on spectrum issues, issued a report about 18 months ago, showing how CBRS is deploying. This is, I think, a very valuable report because CBRS, with reporting from what we call the administrators of that service, are able to identify how often it's being used, how many users are on the system. Showed that report got off to a great start. ITS will be issuing another report, hopefully in the coming days, if not weeks. Giving you a preview here, I think the growth rates will still be encouraging on this. It's got a positive growth rate, which is encouraging as well. So stand by for that report as well. And I think one of the top numbers that I happen to see from the draft report is, I think in the United States, we have about 400,000 networks that are using this service. So it's a pretty good number. We've also continued to modify the regulatory parameters for CBRS. As we, and particularly the federal government, Department of Defense, have gone more comfortable with it in protecting our very incumbent users. So this means that we've modified the propagation model. We've accounted for some additional losses that we can. So what this means is we could tremendously decrease the size of the coordination areas, in the order of 72 million people. So right now in the CBRS today, right now in the CBRS world, we can have unencumbered access for around 240 million people in the United States. We still have some areas along the coastline, right? But those have shrunk. They still have to go through the sensing to determine if the spectrum would be available or not for those users. So that's so the report is going to be from a time element to just before we had the introduction to what we call the CBRS 2.0. So we're hoping to make this ITS report a longitudinal report. So hopefully the next report after the one that's about to be released will capture any additional improvements from that. So that's a little bit of an update on CBRS. Another one from the FCC perspective is the 6 gigahertz band, which principally is unlicensed. They're using the automated frequency coordination system. So that uses principally a kind of a notification / scheduling, since those are principally fixed links that are used 24/7. The FCC has also implemented a kind of a very low powered option as well, that they may not need to access that AFC, and they're looking at modifying that as well. So a lot going on in that 6 gigahertz band as well. So those are two examples of spectrum sharing here in the US. By the way, if you have any questions as I'm proceeding, you're welcome to ask. So pivoting to the National Spectrum Strategy, this was released almost a year ago, November 13th of last year. It was released by the White House and identified several what we call pillars, kind of major items that we would like to focus on. Of course, the first pillar deals with band studies. I'll be touching with that in a moment. But I think for this audience, pillar 3 is certainly of interest, and that's spectrum sharing work that I've done under that. And the emphasis is going to be on dynamic forms of sharing, specifically looking at some research aspects, creating investment incentives, setting forth measurable goals. And then also the development of a national research and development plan, an R&D plan, which was just released about a year ago. So, about a month ago. So that R&D plan was released about a month ago, and that was actually the first deliverable from the National Spectrum Strategy. And I think the first step in the process for us to set up some test beds throughout the country. Kind of jumping ahead here. Let me keep it on that slide here. With regard to the implementation plan, and particularly the band studies. So the pillar 1 has 3 bands that we identified for study, and those studies have commenced. They are the lower 3 gigahertz band, the 7-8 gigahertz band, and yes, the more millimeter wave band at 37 gigahertz. The first one out the door pursuant to the implementation plan will be the 37 gigahertz. That's talking about the lower 37 gigahertz. We expect that report to be issued before the end of the year, which is consistent with our implementation schedule. I think what we're seeing in the US, there's some interest, and particularly by the cable companies in this spectrum. We'll see how it matures. We're looking at it from the federal side because there's some federal incumbents that need to be somewhat protected, even though it's kind of lightly used by federal incumbents, but also it's a band identified by the Department of Defense as being for future uses potentially, right? So they want to be given priority parts and some parts of that lower 37 gigahertz band. And there is some passive protections between 36 and 37 gigahertz as well that we need to be very careful to protect. So we anticipate that being issued by the end of the year. And of course, that'll be transmitted to the FCC for their consideration. The other two bands have a longer time to be studied. And to be clear, studying, that does not imply that they will be repurposed for anything other than their current incumbent users. Let me underscore that. It's a study. No decisions have been reached. So one is the lower 3 gigahertz band from 3.1 to 3.45. Some of you may recall that our Department of Defense mod already looked at this earlier underneath the program they call the Embers report. So it's certainly identified there are a lot of critical federal uses in this band. And I think the takeaway was, it's pretty congested, pretty hard to use without coming up with some creative dynamic spectrum sharing opportunities. And that's kind of what the next step will be is, particularly in the US, saying, okay, are there some technologies, particularly in the sensing realm as well, that will really allow us to enable this band for anything other than federal uses? But it's going to be a very challenging project because again, there are a lot of uses in this band. The other band that's getting a lot of questions is a 7.8 gigahertz band. And again, this remains under study in this country. So the band studies have just started. We've got a 2-year timeline on this. This is also a WRC agenda item, right? Agenda item 1.7. I see a lot of nods in the audience knowing about that. And so we're tracking that as well. But in the United States, on the federal side, there are thousands of point-to-point microwave links. We have satellite downlinks as well used by the Weather Service and other agencies as well. And plus, on the upper part of the band, right, you have ultra wideband that uses this band quite a bit, along with Earth exploration downlinks. So this band has quite a few uses as well, and it's going to be a process to study this. And of course, also recognizing as well, it is a NATO band as well for satellite communications, which brings some interesting considerations as well. So that's currently what we're looking at, and currently an update as to what we're doing on the band studies. So jumping to the dynamic spectrum sharing demonstration. So we're focusing on the lower 3 gigahertz, and with our partner with the Department of Defense, this perhaps could build on the CBRS framework as a possibility there if it works. And again, it builds on that DoD report that was issued about a year ago. They call that the Embers report, the Emerging Mid-Band Radar Spectrum Sharing Effort. So this demonstration will be led by both the Department of Defense, DoD, and NTIA, and it's intended to be an effort that spanning all the stakeholders, right? The government, industry, along with the civil society. And of course, the FCC will be with us every step of the way on this active participation. This program will have kind of 6 goals, which I have outlined on this slide here. It'll be developing a mechanism beyond what we hope, automated or frequency coordination mechanisms. It will demonstrate that dynamic spectrum sharing, DSS, will enable the US to more effectively operate in adversarial environments. Maybe have some connection with RANs, right, with radio access networks, and being able to share the spectrum and manage the spectrum. We'll have to obtain data on both federal and non-federal sharing and how the two can coexist, especially in the priority. Obfuscation and security, I think that that certainly certainly clear and probably doesn't need any additional explanation. And then as well, at the end of the day, right, how the what will enforce, right? If we have someone, particularly on the non-federal side, being on the federal side, right? If a non-federal actor is not operating properly, how can we mitigate that harmful interference? It's worth mentioning very quickly. Earlier this year, we have what we call a wireless supply chain innovation fund. You're probably wondering, why are we talking about a wireless innovation fund and spectrum sharing? But there's actually a very interesting component to that, and that's asking for proposals to look at software-defined radio as it relates to spectrum sharing. So in other words, are there any spectrum sharing R&D grants that the United States government could offer in this space to try to advance dynamic spectrum sharing? Those notice of what we call the NOFOs, notice of funding opportunities, was released. Several companies have sent in proposals for that. They're being assessed, and then the U.S. government will have to make a decision, hopefully later this year, early next year, on if those, if any of those are worthy to be granted. But very exciting as we're very excited really as we're putting real money behind this in the R&D space. So in conclusion, thank you again for the opportunity to be here. It's exciting times in spectrum space. And certainly spectrum sharing, we think it will be very critical in spectrum management as we move forward. Thank you very much.